He stole the profits, but he forgot one thing: the person who built the empire. Watch what happens when she liquidates his entire luxury collection. It started with the sin of expensive leather, the sweet, intoxicating smell of our perfect life. The smell of leather and expensive cologne used to make my chest feel warm, like sinking into a favorite armchair on a crisp autumn evening. It was the sin of us, of success, of the beautiful, perfectly curated life we'd built together. My partner, Elias, who was the architect of that life. He didn't just participate in it, he commanded it. His hands, always immaculate, were the ones that signed the contracts, the ones that picked out the silk linings for my suits, the ones that arranged the vintage wine collection in the cellar. He was charming, impeccably dressed, and possessed that effortless confidence that makes people instantly trust you, even before you've said a single word. We own a small but thriving boutique downtown, specializing in high-end, bespoke goods. My vision was the creative side, the design, the sourcing, the customer experience. Elias handled the back end, the finances, the high-level negotiations, the general management that kept the gears turning smoothly. We were a perfect machine, a two-piece puzzle clicking together with satisfying precision. When we first started dating, it was just the shared passion for aesthetics, coffee dates that turned into long walks through botanical gardens, evenings spent debating the merits of Italian versus French tailoring, late nights poring over inventory sheets fueled by cheap red wine and ambitious dreams. But as the business grew, so did the luxury surrounding us. We upgraded the apartment overlooking the park. We moved from a dependable sedan to a sleek, silent German model. The furniture became less about function and more about statement. Elias's personal collection started to expand, too. First, it was a single, exquisite leather attaché. Then, a set of rare Mont Blanc pens. Then, the watches, a subtle Patek Philippe for a wedding, a bolder Audemars Piguet for celebrations. The escalation started quietly, almost insultingly so. Small discrepancies in the quarterly reports. A missing receipt here, a slightly inflated invoice there. At first, I attributed it to the chaos of growth, to the sheer volume of transactions we were juggling. I'd glance at the numbers, frown, and tell Elias, "Honey, did you check the petty cash log for September? Something feels off." He'd wave a dismissive hand, flashing that perfect, practiced smile. "Relax, darling. It's just the paperwork catching up. I'll sort it out tomorrow." But the small discrepancies became a pattern. They stopped being isolated errors and started becoming a systematic pattern of subtraction. A $500 discrepancy here, easily blamed on a Mesquite vendor payment. A $3,000 variance there, which he'd attribute to a tax write-off adjustment. It was like he was subtly skimming crumbs off the main cake, testing the waters to see how much he could get away with. The real alarm bells started ringing when the annual profit review came around. We were doing well, better than last year, even exceeding the projections we'd set during that optimistic New Year's glow. I pulled up the final ledger, cross-referencing the bank deposits against the sales figures. My stomach dropped, a heavy, sickening lurch that felt like a stone settling in my gut. The numbers didn't just feel off, they were fundamentally wrong. He hadn't been skimming crumbs. He had been systematically draining the reserves, transferring profit into accounts that were ostensibly operational buffers, but which bore no logical connection to our actual expenditures. He had been taking the lion's share of the growth, funneling it into his own personal, ever-expanding empire of luxury. The total, when it finally registered in my brain, was staggering. It wasn't a rounding error. It was a significant, undeniable theft. Over the last 18 months, Elias had siphoned off nearly a quarter of our net profits, a quarter of what we had worked for, the quarter that was supposed to fund our dream trip to the Amalfi Coast, the quarter that was supposed to allow us to finally hire that second designer assistant. When I finally brought it to him, I didn't yell immediately. The rage was there, a tightly coiled viper in my chest. But in that moment, all it was cold, paralyzing clarity. I placed the printout on the mahogany desk in our home office, the same desk where he'd signed the papers for our first major lease agreement, the desk where he'd polished the silver fittings on his favorite vintage travel trunk. "Elias," I began, my voice sounding unnervingly calm, almost clinical. "Look at this." He glanced down at the sheet, his smile faltering just a fraction of a second. He picked up the paper, his movements suddenly less fluid, more stiff. He scanned the figures, his eyes flicking over the debits and credits like a man expecting a sudden, painful blow. When he looked up at me, the mask didn't completely shatter, but it cracked. The practice charm dissolved, revealing something leaner, something defensive, something deeply guilty underneath. Well, he said, his tone shifting from smooth assurance to a brutal defensiveness. That's a lot of money. It's a quarter of our profits. I corrected him, leaning across the desk so that our faces were close. I could smell the faint, expensive scent of sandalwood mixed with the metallic tang of his anxiety. A quarter that you've been funneling into your personal acquisitions. He finally leaned back, crossing his arms over his bespoke jacket. A gesture of wounded dignity. Don't be so dramatic. It's an investment, darling, a necessary capital injection. These things don't buy themselves. A necessary injection? Elias, you didn't inject them. You stole them. You treated our shared future like your personal ATM. It's an asset diversification strategy. He snapped, the patience finally running dry. You wouldn't understand. You're too focused on the aesthetic, the color palette. You don't grasp the strategic necessity of owning things of demonstrable value. He gestured around the room, at the Italian leather sofa, the abstract modernist painting, the gleaming clock on the mantelpiece. This life, the status, it requires collateral, and I'm providing it. You're providing your status, I countered, the quiet calm finally giving way to a surge of white-hot indignation. You're providing the narrative that says, look at us, we are successful, we are sophisticated, and yes, Elias owns 3 watches that cost more than your monthly salary. We stood there, locked in that silent confrontation, the printed ledger between us like a damning piece of evidence. He tried to appeal to sentimentality. Think of the image, Amelia. Think of the weddings we'll attend, the dinners we'll host. Don't you want that? Don't you want us to look perfect? I want honesty. I whispered, the word thick with years of deferred resentment. I want a partner, a high-end fiduciary agent whose primary motive is ego gratification. The turning point wasn't a screaming match. It was a decision, a precise, calculated movement born from profound exhaustion. The rage was still there, roaring, but it had been channeled, focused, honed. It was no longer a messy explosion. It was a scalpel. I looked past him, past the expensive wool of his trousers, past the smug set of his jaw, and saw the whole picture, the flawless, curated facade, and the rot underneath. The stolen profit wasn't just money. It was trust. It was partnership. It was the promise of a shared tomorrow, all meticulously siphoned into his private vault of status symbols. You want collateral? I asked, my voice regaining its steady, resonant pitch. You want assets that demonstrate value? Fine, let's see how much value you truly appreciate. Elias blinked, a flicker of triumph crossing his face. He thought he had won the argument, that he had successfully defended his hoarding habits. What are you going to do? He asked, a hint of smug amusement coloring the question. Throw a fit? Demand a performance review? I didn't answer with words. I turned sharply, walked out of the office, and went to the climate-controlled display cabinet in the main living area. Inside, resting on velvet cushions, was the monument to his avarice, his collection, the watches, the pens, the rare leather goods, the cufflinks that looked like miniature pieces of art. I gently pulled out the first item, a magnificent, heavy timepiece. It felt cold and solid in my hands. You took the profits, I stated, my eyes locked on his, ensuring he felt the absolute finality of the declaration. You stole the vision we built together. Then, I began. I didn't toss them. Throwing them would imply a lack of control, an emotional outburst. Instead, I handled them with the same meticulous care he applied to them, each piece a tiny, beautiful indictment. The attaché case went next, its rich hide protesting slightly as it left the glass. The pens followed, their gold nibs catching the afternoon light. I laid them all on the Persian rug, creating an elaborate, glittering tableau of stolen success. You want assets? I repeated, picking up a pair of dark, gleaming cufflinks. These are your assets, your proof of superiority. Elias started to move toward them, his defensive posture shifting into one of possessive urgency. Amelia, wait, don't. Put them back. We can negotiate. We can reallocate the funds. We can buy you a new necklace, a better sofa. No. I walked over to the leather armchair, his chair, the one he claimed represented his taste, and placed the watch, the most expensive one, right on the seat cushion. You don't get to negotiate the principle of the theft, Elias. You get to negotiate the terms of my mercy. The liquidation began in earnest. I started pairing them up, grouping the items by value and type. The watches went first, arranged in a perfect semicircle, a glittering, arrogant crown. Then the pens, lined up like miniature soldiers, their silver barrels reflecting the light. These, I said, tapping the leather briefcase, these represent the profit from the spring collection, which you diverted into your personal purchasing spree. I moved to the display cabinet door, and with a decisive click, I pulled it open completely, letting the whole collection spill out onto the polished wood floor. It looked less like a collection and more like a hoard, a magnificent, glittering pile of proof. These, I continued, gesturing to the pens, represent the summer dividend, the capital you used to fund your unnecessary trips to Milan. He finally reached out, his hand hovering over the most prized piece, a complicated chronograph. He looked at it like it was an extension of his own wrist, something that should never leave his sight. Amelia, please, just one piece. Let me keep the Cartier. It's irreplaceable. Irreplaceable, I scoffed, a genuine, sharp sound of derision. Is my trust irreplaceable, Elias? Because that's what you treated it like, a disposable, easily leveraged commodity. I picked up the Cartier, turning it over in my palm, admiring the intricate engraving that marked his presumed perfection. The Cartier, I said, holding it up to him, letting him see the reflection of his own shocked face in the crystal, is now the anchor. Then I began the systematic dismantling. I didn't just empty the cabinet, I dismantled the narrative. Each item was separated, judged, and then placed into a corresponding pile: the spring haul, the summer diversion, the unnecessary flair. The rage was starting to burn clean through the exhaustion. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the deliberate, subtle erosion of my belief in him. He hadn't just skimmed. He had been performing a slow-motion act of marital infidelity through finance. You want to showcase your taste? I asked, my voice rising slightly, regaining some of the power it held at the boutique. You want to demonstrate the value of your acquisitions? I walked to the small, elegant side table where we kept the keys to the luxury car. I picked up the fob. Then this is the new centerpiece. I walked to the pile of watches and placed the Cartier directly beside it, like a queen crowning her army. I then picked up the entire pile of the most expensive, non-wearable items, the vintage fountain pens, the rare leather journals, and stacked them neatly on top of the Cartier, making a small, arrogant monument of stolen worth. This, I declared, tapping the stack, this is the total amount you stole from our joint venture. Elias finally let go of the chronograph, his shoulders slumping. The fight had drained out of him, replaced by a heavy, winded pride. And what happens now? He whispered, the grand performance suddenly stripped down to a pathetic plea for rescue. I looked down at the pile, at the tangible evidence of his betrayal, and then back up at him. The emotion in my eyes wasn't pure fury anymore. It was a deep, settling sorrow, mixed with a terrifying sense of liberation. Now, I said, my voice dropping back to that low, steady register that always made him lean in to listen. Now, we begin the liquidation process. We are going to sell these items, Elias, at the highest possible market rate. Because you have proven you are capable of appreciating high value. You have proven you deserve the best. I nudged the pile slightly with my foot, making the watches chime softly in the room. We are going to turn your collection, your monument to your selfishness, back into capital. And then, we are going to use that capital to fund something real, something shared. I finally moved away from the pile, turning to face him fully, my hands empty, clean of the evidence, yet feeling heavier than any gold watch. We are going to fund the Amalfi Coast trip, and we are going to hire that second designer assistant. And I paused, letting the weight of that final promise settle between us. We are going to start rebuilding the trust, piece by expensive piece, right here in this room, on this rug, surrounded by the proof of what you took. He stared at the pile, his expression cycling through shock, devastation, and a small, weak flicker of hope. He finally understood. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a restructuring. This was the surgical excision of the toxic element from a finely tuned machine. What do you want? He finally managed, the grand vocabulary failing him. I smiled, and this time, it wasn't the practiced, dazzling smile of the successful partner. It was tired, real, and utterly victorious. I want you to start earning it back, Elias. every single day, and you start by accepting that the most beautiful thing in this entire collection, I said, gesturing to the courtier, the pinnacle of his pride, isn't the metal or the mechanism. It's the shared history we were supposed to build around it, and you just tried to buy your way out of that.